The Seven Dwarfs are a group of characters that appear in the fairy tale Snow White. History: the Seven Dwarfs are a group of dwarfs that live in a tiny cottage and work in the nearby mines. Snow White happened upon their house after being told by the huntsman to flee from the Queen's kingdom. When the Seven Dwarfs return home, they immediately become aware that someone sneaked in secretly, because everything in their home is in disorder. During their loud discussion about who sneaked in, they discover the sleeping Snow White. The girl wakes up and explains to them what happened, and the dwarfs take pity on her, saying, "If you will keep house for us, and cook, make beds, wash, sew, and knit, and keep everything clean and orderly, then you can stay with us, and you shall have everything that you want." They warn her to be careful when alone at home and to let no one in when they are away delving in the mountains. When the Queen disguised as an old peddler ties a colorful, silky bodice onto Snow White which causes her to faint, the Seven Dwarfs return just in time and Snow White revives when the dwarfs loosen the lace. When the Queen dresses as a comb seller and gives Snow White a poisoned comb, the Seven Dwarfs save her again. The Queen then appears disguised as a farmer's wife and gives Snow White a poisoned apple. This time, the Seven Dwarfs are unable to revive the girl, because they can't find the source of Snow White's poor health and, assuming that she is dead, they place her in a glass coffin. After some time has passed, a prince traveling through the land sees Snow White where he strides to her coffin, and instantly falls in love with her upon being enchanted by her beauty. The Seven Dwarfs allow to let him have the coffin, and as his servants carry the coffin away, they stumble on some roots and the apple comes out of Snow White's throat, reviving her. Names: the following is a list of names of the Seven Dwarfs from multiple versions of the Snow White story. There are many adaptations to the story of Snow White, including animation, film, books, plays, etc. This is a listing of the Seven Dwarfs' names based on release date. The original Snow White story, written by the Brothers Grimm, did not feature names to any of the dwarfs. Snow White and the Huntsman and Once Upon a Time feature 8 dwarfs, while the 1991 Japanese Snow White only featured 6. Other dwarfs: Zundi, the Hungarian Sleepy, is often used as a nickname among Hungarians. The 80s sitcom The Charmings contained one of the dwarves, whose name was Luther. The TV series Once Upon a Time uses the same names as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. There is also an 8th dwarf called Stealthy, and a 9th honorary dwarf called Tiny. Grumpy was initially called Dreamy. Tiny was actually a giant in the series before being cursed by Cora, at which time he became human-sized. Popular culture: Disney Dwarfs. A Disney version of the Seven Dwarfs, also called Disney Dwarfs as a potential Disney Consumer Products Disney Toon Studios franchise, appeared in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The Seven Dwarfs in this are: Doc, the leader of the Seven Dwarfs. Doc wears glasses and often mixes up his words. Dopey, Dopey is the only dwarf who does not have a beard. He is clumsy and mute, with Happy explaining that he has simply never tried to speak. He is like Gideon the cat in Pinocchio and the title character as the circus elephant Dumbo. Bashful, Bashful is very shy and sweet. He is also described as cute. He also has a rosy blushy face. Grumpy, Grumpy initially disapproves of Snow White's presence in the dwarf's home, but later warns her of the threat posed by the Queen and rushes to her aid upon realizing that she is in danger, leading the charge himself. He has the biggest nose of the dwarfs, and is frequently seen with one eye shut. Sneezy, Sneezy's name is earned by his extraordinarily powerful sneezes, which are seen blowing even the heaviest of objects across a room. Sleepy, Sleepy is always tired and appears laconic in most situations. Happy, Happy is the joyous dwarf and is usually portrayed laughing. The Seven Dwarfs also appeared in cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue, Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, House of Mouse, and Kingdom Hearts, Birth by Sleep. In the early 2000s, Disney Toon Studios joined Disney Consumer Products as their internal Disney conglomerate video partner in developing the new Disney franchises. While DCPI'd other potential franchises, Disney Toon looked to the Seven Dwarfs for a male-centric franchise to counterbalance the female-centric fairies. While Disney purists did not want a sequel to Snow White as they had given a negative response to an April Fool's joke by Animated Views, the dwarfs were still popular that could not be ignored. By 2005, the Seven Dwarfs computer-animated sequel to Snow White was officially underway. Paul and Gortandzai was one team that was given an attempt at a movie pitch, which was Follow the Dwarfs, in which they trapped the villain in the magic mirror and setting it up for Snow White movie. Given the possible demand, Buena Vista Games brought in Obsidian Entertainment, a game developer, who pitched a video game focusing on the dwarves' similar ancestors. DTS executives were not feeling that the two franchise-launching projects were coming together well enough that they turned to Mike Deezer, who worked on the Tinker Bell movie story. Deezer and Evan Spiliotopoulos pitched a Lord of the Rings-style epic for the dwarfs while connecting seamlessly with the original movie, which was given permission to move forward. With interfering managers wanting a tragic backstory for Dopey, Deezer decided that he could not go forward. Walt Disney Animation Studios Chief Creative Officer John Lasseter about 2 months later ended production on the film. The 7D is an American animated television series produced by Disney Television Animation franchise based on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This series is the first Walt Disney Animation Studios classic series. Also, the dwarfs were given a new theme park attraction, the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train Coaster. Sesame Street. In Sesame Street, there were different versions of the Seven Dwarfs where each of them was made from an Anything Muppets. The 6 dwarfs seen in episode 279 consisted of Sparky, Snooky, Pokey, Flaky, Drippy, and Sneaky. Snow White visited their house instead of the 7 dwarfs by mistake and was able to see the difference. In a Sesame Street news flash that was seen in episode 2787, the 7 emotional dwarfs appear where they were interviewed by Kermit the Frog. Their names are cheerful, sad, angry, proud, fearful, lovey, and surprised. In episode 41,413,128, the 7 dwarfs appear opposite of Snow White. The 7 dwarfs consist of Clumsy, Vertigo, Gassy, Itchy, Smelly, Sensitive Nose, and Hammy. Happily Ever After. In Happily Ever After, it was mentioned that the 7 dwarfs have opened up a mine in the next kingdom. In their place is the 7 dwarfles who have received a power based on nature to help out their boss Mother Nature. The dwarfles consisted of Muddy, a dwarfle who has power over the earth, and as such performs such tricks as causing minor tremors and such. She feels most comfortable playing in the mud. Sunburn, a dwarfle who has power over sunlight, and is able to focus sun rays in any area and to whatever extremity she so wishes. She uses her power in the film to clear away clouds and summon down a beam of light to illuminate a dark cave. She has a New Yorker accent and attitude, and her catchphrase is "This really burns me up." Blossom, a dwarfle who has power over plants and flowers, and is seen throughout the animation zapping the ground and having flowers spring up. It becomes apparent that her flora powers are less effective if the area is less natural or adaptable, as in the realm of Doom. Blossom is very reminiscent of her voice actress with Gabor's mannerisms, penchant for the beautiful and fashionable, and even her signature accent. Marina, a dwarfle who has power over all lakes and rivers, but the only example of her powers in the film is being able to breathe underwater. Marina carries herself as a gentlewoman and has a British accent. Critterina, a dwarfle who has power of all animals who are created by Mother Nature. She is able to communicate with all animals, regardless of their creators, but does not have control over animals who are not Mother Nature's work, like Lord Malis one-horned wolves. It should be noted that while the others dwarfles are human in appearance, Critterina looks anthropomorphic. She aptly has a cowgirl mentality and a Texan accent. Moonbeam, a dwarfle is never seen using her powers, but has the distinct characteristic of being in a deep slumber and sleepwalking in the day, and only awaking at night. Thundrella, the 7th and youngest dwarfle, and is considered the black sheep of the 7 because of her inability to control her powers. She has power over weather, and always seems to miss her attempts at creating storms. She ends up saving the day by hitting Lord Malice with a bolt of lightning she creates from her fingertip. The Dwarfs help Snow White on her quest to rescue the prince from the Queen's sorcerer brother Lord Malice. Shrek, the Seven Dwarfs appear in the Shrek series. In Shrek, the Seven Dwarfs appear in the first film carrying Snow White's coffin. When they place the coffin on the table, Shrek says, "Oh no! Dead girl off the table." One of the dwarfs says, "Where else are we supposed to put it?" The bed's already been taken as Shrek finds the big bad wolf in his bed. They are seen again in Shrek 2 when they give Shrek a ring engraved with "I love you" in flaming letters for Fiona. In Shrek the Third, one of them is given to Fiona as a wedding present from Snow White, who says she has 6 more at home. The Seven Dwarfs are seen at the end of Scared Shrekless when Shrek and Fiona celebrate by egging them. Mirror Mirror, in Mirror Mirror, the Seven Dwarfs work as highwaymen and rob from anyone that comes down their way by wearing boots with retractable stilts that make them look taller. The Seven Dwarfs consist of Grimm, the leader of the Seven Dwarfs. He is named after the brothers Grimm. Butcher, a dwarf that used to work as a butcher. Wolf, a dwarf in a wolf cape. Napoleon, a dwarf that wears a hat similar to Napoleon Bonaparte. Half Pint, a dwarf who has a crush on Snow White. Grub, a dwarf who is always eating. Chuckles, a dwarf who chuckles a lot. The Seven Dwarfs help Snow White to form a resistance against Queen Clementiana. Snow White and the Huntsman, in Snow White and the Huntsman, the Seven Dwarfs started out as 8 dwarfs when they are encountered by Snow White and Eric the Huntsman while fleeing Queen Ravenna. The Seven Dwarfs consist of Beith, the leader of the Seven Dwarfs. Muir, the blind elder dwarf who possesses the powers of premonition and is the father of Quit. Quit, a dwarf who is the son of Muir. Col, a dwarf who is the brother of Daid. Daid, a dwarf who is the brother of Col. Gort, a dwarf who is ill-tempered. Nyan, a dwarf who is Beith's right-hand man. Gus, a dwarf who develops a bond with Snow White. He is killed during an attack by Queen Ravenna's men where he sacrifices his life to protect Snow White. As the dwarves were played by actors who had their faces digitally transmuted onto small bodies, this caused a protest from the little people of America. Once upon a time, in Once Upon a Time, the Seven Dwarfs are on the side of Snow White and go by their Disney names. Grumpy is one of 8 dwarf brothers who hatched from their eggs at the same time. Like all dwarfs, he is immediately sent to work in the mines and is given an axe, which names him Dreamy. Because his egg was accidentally sprinkled with fairy dust by the fairy Nova, he dreams about her and falls in love with her. Later, he meets her and the pair make plans to buy a boat and see the world. However, the blue fairy tells him that if he and Nova run away together, she will lose her wings and she will never be truly happy. To prevent this, Dreamy ends their relationship and breaks her heart. He returns to the mines the next day and breaks his axe mining. When he is given another, it renames him Grumpy. He is later caught possessing a stolen diamond, which he did not know was stolen, and is seen in King George's dungeon in a cell next to Snow White's. He is freed by Stealthy, one of his brothers, and he in turn frees Snow. As he and Stealthy escape, they are discovered by George and his guards and Stealthy is killed. Before the guards can kill Grumpy, Snow goes with George in exchange for Grumpy's life. Grumpy and the remaining 6 dwarfs run into Snow outside the castle. Grumpy tells her that she must live with the pain of a lost love to grow as a person and does not allow her to drink a potion that makes her forget about her love for Prince James. The 7 dwarfs then allow her to live with them. Later, Grumpy goes to tell her that James called off his wedding, but he discovers that she drank the potion. He and his brothers try to confront Snow about her new, mean-spirited behavior, but they drive her to try and kill the evil queen instead. He takes her to see Rumpelstiltskin, who gave her the potion, but he advises her on the best way to kill the queen instead. Eventually, Snow regains her memory and apologizes to the dwarfs for her behavior. She decides to rescue James, who was captured by George, and Grumpy and his brothers go with her. Grumpy is later seen discussing the best course of action against the evil queen and her curse, calling for war. He is also seen as a guard looking out for the curse in a watchtower of Snow's and James's castle. In Storybrooke, he is Leroy, a janitor at the hospital in the town drunk. He, like the rest of Storybrooke, is hostile toward Mary Margaret, who is Snow White, after learning about her affair with David Nolan, who is Prince James. He meets Sister Astrid, who is Nova, and decides to help Mary Margaret sell candles for the nunnery and raise money for the nunnery's rent so that he can be near Astrid. When he and Mary Margaret fail to sell enough candles, he lies about the number they sold because he is unable to disappoint Astrid. He tries to sell his boat to Mr. Gold in the hopes that he will forgive the rent. Mr. Gold refuses. Astrid later learns about the candles and is upset that he lied. That night, Leroy causes a blackout, forcing the residents to buy candles. The candles sell out and the nunnery is able to pay its rent. Leroy then offers the grateful Astrid the opportunity to be the first passenger on his boat. Leroy's memories as Grumpy are restored when the curse is broken, and he hugs Snow when he next sees her. He wishes for Regina to be killed by the mob led by Dr. Whale, though he decides against it at Snow's insistence. He unites the dwarfs together and they begin to mine for fairy dust again. Sleepy is a sleepy dwarf who is one of the Seven Dwarfs. In Storybrooke, he is Walter, a security guard that works at Storybrooke Hospital who occasionally dozes off on the job. Sneezy is a dwarf who often sneezes and is one of the Seven Dwarfs. In Storybrooke, he is Tom Clark, the owner of the Dark Star Pharmacy where several characters are seen purchasing different products throughout the show. In Season 2, Sneezy joined the other dwarfs in an experiment that involved why the fairy tale characters can't leave Storybrooke. Upon drawing the shortest straw, Sneezy crossed the border out of Storybrooke and lost his memories of his past life in Fairy Tale Land once again. Doc is a dwarf who is one of the Seven Dwarfs. In Storybrooke, he still has his name but his occupation is unknown. Bashful is a dwarf who is one of the Seven Dwarfs. In Storybrooke, his human form is not named. Dopey is a dwarf who is one of the Seven Dwarfs and has never spoken. In Storybrooke, his human form is not named. Happy is a dwarf who is one of the Seven Dwarfs. In Storybrooke, his human form is not named. There were some other dwarfs that were associated with the Seven Dwarfs. Stealthy was a dwarf who used to be part of the Seven Dwarfs group. He received his name from his axe like the other dwarfs because of his skillful infiltration abilities. He once tried to break Grumpy and Snow White out of his prison cell in King George's castle, but was killed during their escape. Grumpy would later comment, "I miss Stealthy," when trying to sneak into an enemy lair. Bossy is a dwarf who is also the leader of the other dwarfs. Watchy is a dwarf who watches over the dwarf eggs until they hatch. References